This is the MOJO, the Meaning of Life and Business podcast, where life and business intersect. Hosted by Jennifer Glass, CEO of Business Growth Strategies International and BGSI Coaching. We are dedicated to your success. Hello and welcome to another episode of MOJO, the Meaning of Life and Business. And thank you all so much for tuning in to another episode. One of the things that we all every now and then have a tendency to happen to us is we tend to get sick. Whether it's because we are pushing ourselves too hard, we're not eating right, we're not drinking enough, we're not sleeping enough. There's a lot of different reasons why our bodies are typically getting sick. And I have a really great guest on the show today who's going to really help us figure out what some of these things are and what we can do about it so that we can try to not get sick as often. Before I bring my interesting guest on, though, let me tell you a little bit about him. Dr. Thomas Cowan is a renowned figure in alternative medicine. He's an accomplished author, speaker, and a holistic health expert who challenges the norms. His 6 best-selling books, including The Contagion Myth and Cancer and the New Biology of Water, revolutionized thinking. Dr. Tom, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jennifer. It's good to be here.
Likewise, thank you. So let me ask you, before we jump into it, how do you get to where you are today?
I mean, I've been at this for almost 50 years because I grew up thinking I might be a doctor, but I didn't really like it. And so I tried to figure out anything else I could do but be a doctor. And then when I was about 20, I found out there was another way to be a doctor than what I had heard. And that got me able to be interested in the subject, and I've been looking into it ever since.
So you decided you didn't want to be a doctor, you want a different path, and that's really interesting. But then you've been looking into the different areas that you've been interested in ever since, like you said, about the last 50 or so years.
I mean, I did go to medical school, and I worked as a doctor. I was even an ER doctor for a while. But I always knew there was something rotten in the state of Denmark, as they say.
Yes, to quote the great bard. So let me ask you, because I know that one of the things that I know there's a difference on in Western medicine as opposed to Eastern medicine is we look at symptoms, we don't look at the cause. And then there's osteopathic doctors versus medical doctors and functional medicine doctors. If we were going to break it all down, can you just help us explain what all of that means so that we kind of have a level of understanding, a foundational level as we move on?
I mean, I'm trained as a conventional medical doctor, MD. And we were taught a certain way of looking at the world and a certain way of looking at, why people get sick and how they get better. And, other people have had different views of this. What I learned is basically none of them, besides really old traditional Chinese medicine and Ayurvedic medicine, and to a certain extent, traditional homeopathy. In a sense, everybody else, so most of the holistic doctors, functional doctors, etc., conventional doctors, osteopaths, even chiropractors, they all think the same thing when you get right down to it. And the difference is, I give a very simple example. If you get a splinter in your finger and you don't take it out, what happens next is you get redness and pus, right? That's pretty obvious. So I asked the question to myself 50 years ago, is the redness and pus a disease? Because that's what I was taught. It's an infection, right? Or is that your body's way of getting rid of the splinter? In which case, it's the therapy. And it seemed obvious to me that your body's response to this foreign body was to make a reaction. And the reaction is the therapy. And the proof of that is when it gets the splinter out, the whole thing goes away. Right? That's pretty obvious. So I then applied it to what about if you breathe splinters or debris like dust and particulate matter and smoke and cigarette smoke and chemtrails and all the rest of it into your lungs? And then what happens is you make mucus and cough and warmth and mucus to get the debris out of your lungs. Now, if you go to a medical doctor or an osteopath or functional doctor, they think you have bronchitis. But I think you have a wise body getting debris out of your lungs. And so the worst thing you can do is to stop that debris from coming out. But that's what medical doctors do. They give you cough suppressants. They give you antibiotics under the disproven theory that it's the bacteria or the alleged virus that causes the disease. But there's actually no evidence that that's true. And so basically, what I eventually learned, this is a long answer to your question, that all of these things we call diseases actually don't really exist. They're strategies your body uses to try to heal itself. And that is the main switch in what I'm talking about.
So let me throw something out there because you said that it's the main switch that we're looking at in the way that the body is addressing these foreign problems. So, cancer, as an example, right? It's a malformed cell that decided it is going to reproduce in the wrong way.
How do you know it's a malformed cell?
Again, that's what Western medicine tells us, but I'm curious to know how
Right.
you would look at it in terms of your way of looking at this.
So, would you be okay if I asked you some questions and so you can really get the thinking here? Because I think
Absolutely.
that okay. Let's imagine you have a house, right? Most people have a house. And let's imagine you have a foyer to your house, right?
Okay.
And let's imagine somebody, maybe somebody you don't know, put some garbage, some stinky garbage in the foyer to your house, right? What would you do next?
Try to get rid of it.
How would you do that?
Pick it up and get it outside.
So how about this? Pick it up, put it in a bag, and take it to the garage. Does that work?
Okay.
Or a can? Let's say
Yeah.
you don't have a
Out to the
bag. You
garbage
put it
can.
in. You put it in a can or a bag or some receptacle, and you take it out to the garage. And then when the trash day comes, you take it to the curb and get rid of it.
Right.
And what if they keep putting more and more and more garbage in your house and your garage gets full? Then you put it in the spare bedroom, right?
Okay.
And then you put it in the living room. And you keep telling the guys, stop putting garbage in my house, but they don't listen. Then you put it in the kitchen, then you put it in the bedroom, and then you have to move out of your house.
Right.
Okay, so you got this body, it's like your house, and somebody puts some nasty garbage in your house. Now, what kind of nasty garbage? Well, they inject you with aluminum. They inject you with cell cultures. Those are called vaccines. They inject you with different chemical agents. They spray chemicals on your food. They process your food. You have toxic emotions and so on, right? And so you poison your body with all these. What does your body do? It puts it in a bag, same as as you would do. We call that bag a tumor. It's not a growth of cells. It's a way for your body to collect up garbage that you unfortunately chose to put in your house called your body, and you put it in a hopefully sort of benign place like a breast. Now, if you keep putting garbage in, it will go from your breast, say, to your liver or your bones or your brain, and then go to the next place. And then eventually you move out of your house, and that's called dying. Now, one of the ways I got into this was I asked oncologists, how does it go from your breast to your liver? And they said, well, it goes through the bloodstream. The cells grow through the bloodstream. So I said, can you show it to me in the bloodstream, right? Because if there's cells, you should be able to see them in the bloodstream. And they said, no, you can't see it in the blood. So I said, well, how do you know it's going through the blood to get from your breast to your liver? Well, how else did it get there? It's just like saying your garbage crawled from your garage to your spare bedroom through the hallway. No, it didn't. You just had to find another place because you keep putting garbage in. Now, here's the thing. If you think like that, you would do the following. A, stop putting garbage in your house. B, take the garbage out quicker, like detoxifying your body. And what I then found is that when people think like that and do that, they actually have amazingly good results if they have this process called cancer. Whereas if they poison themselves worse, like with chemotherapy, what we found is it doesn't work. So that convinced me that this is a much better way of understanding this process.
So let me understand if I get this. So you're basically suggesting that if somebody has cancer, instead of doing chemotherapy, radiation, or any other of the traditional treatments, basically what you are saying is that they go about a detoxification process where they watch what they're eating. They no longer take any injections, things along those lines that we're getting. But what else do we need to do to detox in a way that would get rid of the those bags, if you will, that you call now the tumor?
So, I mean, that's a complicated question, and it also, because what I've learned is we don't see these as the same disease categories that conventional medicine does. So let me give you an example. I had, so what I learned is every person is a story. And instead of treating rheumatoid arthritis, I would treat the story. So, for instance, one woman would come to me, and this is a true story, and she decided to only eat, raw vegan plant food for 6 months. At the end of the 6 months, her joints were swollen and red and painful, and she was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis. And so they said this is a autoimmune disease, which is interesting because that means it's the antibodies that are destroying her body. So I ended up looking for one study in the medical literature that shows that antibodies destroy your body, and I can give you 100% assurance there is no such study. So that is a disproven, falsified hypothesis. Now, the next woman who came in, and it typically is women, she was fine, and then she had a flu shot, and then 2 or so weeks later, she gets red swollen joints, and eventually then diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis. So the first person needed to change their diet and eat food that would actually help support healthy joint development. And the second person needed to detoxify from being poisoned with aluminum and cell cultures and steroids and antibiotics. So those are not the same disease, even though they're both called rheumatoid arthritis. But clearly, they have different causes, different etiologies, and they need different treatment. And so, one of the things I learned, and this is doing this for 40 years, as long as I was caught in the conceptual trap of treating rheumatoid arthritis or treating cancer, I would get nowhere. So I learned that everybody had their own story, and I heard the story, told it back to them, and then helped them change whatever it was that caused that problem. That's how I did medicine. And that's how we do medicine at the New Biology Clinic. It's not diseases. You cannot, if you say, what is depression? What is rheumatoid arthritis? There's no definition. They say rheumatoid arthritis is swollen joints and an antibody level over 1 to 32 dilutions. And so when I was in medical school, I said, so if somebody has an antibody level of 1 to 31 dilution, then they're fine and they don't need to take medicine. And if it's 1 to 32, they have a disease called rheumatoid arthritis. I mean, that's absolute nonsense. That's not a biological phenomena. That is that's statistics. So that whole model of disease is basically flawed. That's why I don't like to answer questions. It depends. Some people, they get a COVID shot and now they have what are called turbo cancers because there's a horrible poison in those shots and their body sequesters it and adds more matter to that. And we have to figure out how to get rid of whatever they were injected with. Now, that may be totally different than the next person who's starving themselves or it's an emotional thing. But the only thing I can say is the first step without which nothing works is you have to stop being delusional and thinking that this was just something that happened to me. That's not the case. This was something you did, you chose, your body is trying to help you. Once you see it like that, you're on the road to recovery.
Got it. Thank you. So I'm curious then, Lyme disease as an example, right?
Lyme disease?
Lyme disease.
Can
So
you give me a
Lyme disease
definition of
comes from
Lyme disease?
ticks.
Give
Sorry?
me a definition of Lyme disease.
Like you were saying about RA, there's a whole bunch of stuff that's there. It's just we think it comes from a tick.
We think it comes from a organism called Borrelia that gets transmitted from the saliva of the ticks into people and causes an infection, which we call Lyme disease. That's what we think.
Right.
Now, it's important to actually go through the claim because what most people don't know, and what I do know, because this is my business, I went to the original study of how they demonstrated that this tick transmits this Borrelia organism that causes people to be sick, right? It was a paper done by a guy named Willy Bergdorfia, who they named the bacteria after. And he had 57 people who had allegedly symptoms of Lyme disease. And he looked through their blood and their urine and their snot and their mucus and their saliva looking for the bacteria. And he found it in 2 people. The other 55 did not have any evidence of the bacteria. And for some bizarre reason, he then says, see, we found the cause of Lyme disease. Now, all I can say is if you go down my street and there's 60 houses and they're all blown up, and 2 of them you find skunks walking around the house, the debris of the blown up houses, nobody who has any sense would say it's the skunks who blew up the houses, because 58 of them didn't even have a skunk. And then if you go looking for one study in the medical literature that shows that isolated pure bacteria cause disease in healthy humans or animals, I can guarantee all my listeners there is not one study that shows that, including Lyme disease. So it's not from Borrelia.
Okay. So hypothetically speaking, somebody has Lyme disease. They need
But
to
see here,
detox
but
the
well,
same
I got to
way?
stop you there because unless you can give me a definition of Lyme disease, which is a problem, because if you say I have this disease, but you can't tell me what the disease is, you're hexing yourself. Stick with what you see. I have swollen joints. Fine. I feel bad. Fine. I'm tired. Got it. I can't think the way I used to. Fine. I got a rash on my arm, place where the tick bit me. I get it. Those are all what are called observables. But as soon as you start talking Lyme disease, you're talking theory, which nobody can even give you a definition of what you're talking about.
Okay.
That's the problem.
Right. So if somebody has those symptoms that you were mentioning, is the same solution the detoxing like the cancer?
So it depends on what happens. So here's the typical scenario. So a person is basically well and they get bit by a tick. Now, ticks do have this enzymes and different proteins which are not good to be injected into you. And so your body tries to get rid of them by having a rash. That's the way to eliminate that tick poison from your body. Now, then people go to a doctor and they say, "Oh, you have Lyme disease," and so they give them an antibiotic, otherwise known as an anti-life drug. That's what antibiotic means. So it basically poisons you, and now you not only have the failure to eliminate the tick poison because it stops you from doing that, but now you have antibiotic toxicity, and then you feel really bad. And then you go back and you say, now I feel really bad. And they give you more antibiotics because the Lyme disease has now become chronic. And so now you have chronic antibiotic toxicity, as well as a delusional mindset that you've been now have this horrible bacteria that's going to devastate your life. And there's no easier way to make somebody sick than to scare the bejabbers out of them. So those two things turn a person who otherwise would have just gotten rid of the tick poison. Now you have a chronically sick person and they call them Lyme disease.
Okay.
If you don't want that, let your body get rid of the tick poison, put some clay over it, it'll suck the poison out, and stay away from ticks and you'll be fine.
So let me ask if somebody was bitten several years ago and no antibiotics were taken for Lyme disease, would that have gotten rid of the Lyme disease from the body or the
Again, there
symptoms?
may be other factors, but it should have. But some people go into a huge sort of fear reaction. Oh my God, I got bit by tick, therefore I'm going to get sick. And we know there's a thing called a nocebo effect, which is people literally talk themselves into being sick. And so then they start doing things like, who knows what, but stuff and change, the way they eat or the way they live, not necessarily in a good way. And then they become chronically sick. And if everything else was fine, it could be just the fear. But again, my whole practice was walking people through what exactly happened to them. And particularly, what were they thinking about when this happened? And I never met somebody, one person, who I couldn't find out something that made me say, you know what? That probably had something to do with it.
Okay. So I'm gonna push back and play devil's advocate for another question here. So there was recently an instance that came out where a tick bit a man. He had alpha gal syndrome that was supposedly transmitted by that tick. Went, had a steak, had anaphylactic shock, but the doctors didn't diagnose it in the hospital. Couple weeks later, he had a burger and died 4 hours after eating that burger because the alpha gal protein anaphylactic shock that happened from that. So I'm playing devil's advocate here. Is that similar in that regard, or is that different?
There is no alpha gal syndrome. There's that whole sort of genetic paradigm of somehow you've got some change in your DNA, which is coding for different proteins, which is about to make you sick. We've actually, me and a friend of ours, if anybody wants to really look into alpha gal syndrome, a friend of mine, Sam Bailey, sambailey.com, did a deep dive into the whole history and science of this alpha gal syndrome. And it's pure scientific nonsense. So I don't really know what happened to that person. A lot of times people come up with these scenarios, but I don't know all the details of what happened and what they did and what they thought and all that. But that story is not the whole story. I can tell you that.
Okay. So let me
Let me
ask you.
just say one thing about so this whole thing with alpha gal syndrome. So it's an abnormal protein made by an abnormal gene. So if you go back into the history of the central dogma of genetics, is we have these discrete parts of the DNA called genes, and one gene codes for one protein. That is the absolute central dogma of genetics. One gene makes RNA, makes protein. So then they allegedly do the Human Genome Project, which I could say more about, but that's another different story. And they find approximately 200,000 proteins. And then they find 20,000 genes. And they told us that each one gene makes one protein. So apparently geneticists are not good at arithmetic, because if you do the math, there's 180,000 proteins which have no gene to code for them, which means that central dogma has been falsified, which, in other words, that's not the way it works. And so any alleged genetic condition or genetic change, which is based on genes coding for proteins, I have absolutely looked at the original papers demonstrating that genes code for proteins, and none of them have proven any such thing. It's basically an assumption. So the whole thing will fall apart, and there's always other reasons. And really what's behind this is what they're doing is they've substituted models for actual observation and experience. So where everything that's wrong with you is based on a model. There's the germ theory model, there's the DNA model, there's the immune system and autoimmune model. They're all models, basically theoretical constructs. And this goes way back to what happened, but that's not the way to do life, and it's not the way to do medicine.
So I want to go back then to the basic premise of what we were talking about. So if somebody wants to avoid getting sick, what is the best way for one to be going about living their life?
Everybody has a different life and a different strategy and a different destiny. All I can say to that is at the end of the day, I've determined, or I've hypothesized, there's four things that make us sick. So one is injuries, like you fall off a horse, break your leg. So that's one category. The next is you're starving. And that could be for food, it could be for shelter, could be for warmth, could be for love, it could be for relationships, it could be for clean water, could be for a lot of things. So, insofar as you don't want to get sick, don't starve yourself and don't fall off horses. Number three, big category is you're poisoned. And again, there's lots of ways of people get poisoned, but interestingly, most of them are medical interventions, vaccines and pharmaceuticals. So if you don't want to get sick, never take a vaccine, don't take a pharmaceutical. There's almost always a better way, and try to avoid harmful EMFs and screens and lots of other things. Get out in the sun. You may be starving for sunlight or being grounded to the earth, etc. So that's number three. And number four is you're delusional, which is actually the main reason most people get sick. They believe certain things, and that beliefs lead to actions, and actions have consequences. So let me give you an example. I had a guy I knew who was a holistic doctor, and he believed in viruses, which turns out don't exist. And he treated people with AIDS with HIV drugs for 20 years. And then COVID came, and because he believed in viruses, he did a reasonable thing, which is to get COVID shots. And 2 days after his third COVID shot, he was dead in his bed from a stroke, otherwise healthy guy. And so he died, not he died because of the COVID shot, but he really died because he believed in viruses. And that's delusional. And he didn't listen, and so that's what happens. So if you don't want to get sick, stick with what you can see and experience. And I think it was Mark Twain who said, "It ain't what you don't know that gets you, it's what you know for sure, but just ain't so." So if anybody wants to remember anything from what I said, that would be the thing. Think about what you know for sure and try to find out whether it's so or not.
Thank you. So, Dr. Tom, let me ask you, people have been listening to our conversation for the last 30 or so minutes, and they're interested in connecting with you. How can they connect with you to stay in touch?
So the main website is drtomcowan.com. And we also have a new biology clinic where people who doctors who do realistic medicine try to help people live better lives, which is different than curing them of imaginary diseases. And that's the newbiologyclinic.com. And it's a great place if you're looking for real help with problems that you're not able to solve on your own.
Thank you. And we'll include those links in the description for the episode so that you can connect with Dr. Tom Cowan. One more question that I have for you, and I'm curious to know the answer. I asked some of my guests this question. The word success, how do you define it? And based on that definition, do you consider yourself to be successful?
Interesting question. I think the second part of that is I can leave it to other people to say whether I've been successful or not. I mean, to me, living an authentic life, which means trying to find who I am and what my destiny is, and then live that out as best I can, as honestly and as much integrity as possible, which is why I don't mince words and I don't try to couch my language in things that are so-called acceptable to other people. Right? I just say what the best I've come to, and obviously that changes over the years as I learn more and grow, and that's all I can do. So insofar as that's success, I don't tend to worry about that very much.
Okay, good answer. Thank you.
All right?
Yes. So the biggest takeaway here is think about what you're living with, what you're doing to your body. Remember, your body is your temple. Like Dr. Tom was saying, would you put garbage in your house or would you try and get rid of it? Knowing how all of that is going, how all of that is happening, is certainly going to potentially have a significant impact on what it is that you do. The best thing for you to consider is what is it that you are doing in your own life? Are you taking care of your system or are you not taking care of your system? If you want more help, definitely connect with Dr. Tom on his websites. And again, that information will be in the description so that you can connect with him, find out the answers to those questions, and really start getting the help that you might be looking for. So, Dr. Tom, thank you so much again for being my guest on the show today.
Okay, thanks, Jennifer. Good to talk to you.
Likewise, thank you. And again, make sure you check out those links. And on that note, this has been another episode of Mojo, the meaning of life and business. And until next time, here is to your success. This has been another episode of Mojo, the meaning of life and business podcast. If you like what you heard, please consider leaving us a review, liking us, or reaching out to us. You can contact us at bgsicoaching.com and let us know what you think. Thanks so much again for listening.